Hey friends, welcome back to How Language Works. Emily here, your friendly neighborhood linguist. In our last video, we dove into the structure of words and how they get built by talking about morphology. In this video, we're exploring how words map onto their meanings, which means we're headed on into the fascinating field of semantics. Lucky for you, I've summed all of this up into 5 easy to understand points. Well, let's get to it. Number 1, definition time. What is semantics? Semantics is the field of study dedicated to the meaning of words in human languages. If I were to tell you I'm a semanticist, that can mean a lot of different things. I could be a cognitive semanticist, a formal semanticist, a lexical semanticist, which all of those come with their own set of methodologies and objects of study. But what they all have in common is that they study how words and meanings map onto one another. In linguistics, we call this form-function mapping. Form refers to the word, for example, in English, house, and function refers to the meaning, so a building for human habitation. For example, some semantic models can impact how we teach computers to process human language, and others can be used to help us learn vocabulary more efficiently when we're learning a foreign language. Now, on to some of the main principles underlying word meaning. Okay, this brings us to point number 2. Words are mostly arbitrary. Think about it like this. Just in the way that money only has value because we assign it value, words only have meaning because we assign them meaning. For example, why do we end up calling trees trees and boxes boxes? The short answer is that we really don't know, but it seems to be mostly arbitrary. Now, there is some evidence that our brains are wired for certain sound patterns to indicate certain things to us. For instance, for most people, the sound sequence kiki sounds like it would represent a spiky object, whereas a sound sequence like bobo sounds like it would represent a round object. But that phenomenon, which is called sound symbolism, doesn't explain how we get so many different languages with so many different words for the same concept. So while we don't have concrete answers for why certain concepts got the word form assignments that they did, we do know something about the how, which boils down to conventionalization. Conventionalization is the process by which a word form comes to be associated with a particular meaning through consistent use. I think we can all agree that the English word form tree is conventionally used to refer to the woody perennial plant that we all know and love. So I would get a lot of confused stares if I decided to start using the word tree to refer to something totally different, like box. That would be weird and unnecessary because that form-function pair is highly conventionalized. And humans, we typically want to understand and be understood in conversation. So it's efficient for us to rely on those conventionalized form-function pairings. Now, while conventionalization is ever present in how we make meaning with our words, that doesn't mean that words and their meanings stay the same over time. On the contrary, that brings us to point number 3. Word meanings evolve as we use words differently. To continue with our money analogy, just like the value of our currencies change, so do the meanings of our words. There's a famous saying, I'll tell you what a word means by the company that it keeps. So this means that a word might start out with one meaning, but then over time, if people are using it in different contexts, it'll accrue a slightly different meaning. For example, the word grab in English used to only refer to suddenly seizing something with your hands. Now we use it in all kinds of contexts. For example, we can say, I'm going to grab a taxi. Grabbing in this case just means get. This change in word meaning from something more specific to something more general is called generalization. And this is a really common change for word meanings over time across languages. Why do word meanings change? There's a lot of reasons, but the main one is metaphorical language use. We as humans like to use language creatively and innovatively. So we oftentimes use a word in a new context to give it a special oomph or to give it a new metaphorical perspective. And in doing so, we're actively reconstructing our language and our words and the meanings that they have every day, which is kind of cool. And this is why we end up with words that have multiple meanings. Like head, for example, refers to the head on a human body, but it also can refer to the head of a company, the head of a table. In linguistics, we call this polysemy, or the coexistence of multiple meanings for a given word. Point number 4, semantics gives us a framework for defining word relationships. I'm sure you've heard of synonyms and antonyms, but did you know that there's a whole bunch of other word relationships out there? As a field, semantics offers us all kinds of helpful terms and taxonomies for mapping how words and meanings can relate to one another. One of my favorites is hypernym, which is what you'd call the umbrella term for a group of related words. For example, the word fruit is the hypernym for words banana, orange, and lemon. To get to our last point, number 5, different languages slice up meaning into different word categories. If you've ever learned another language, you know this is true. For example, in English, we have one word for the article the, but German has 3 different versions of the that differ by grammatical gender. Spanish has 2 words to convey different types of to be, ser and estar. English just has 1, to be. This comes back to the idea that words in any language often have multiple meanings, which leaves our everyday interactions full of ambiguity with lots of room for confusion and misinterpretation. And yet we manage to understand each other most of the time. The reason for this is that we are wired to make inferences based on context, which we'll get to in the next video in our series focused on pragmatics. To wrap things up, let's do a quick recap, because in today we learned a lot about how semantics works and how words map onto their meanings. So, to recap, words are to meaning as money is to value. That is, it's mostly arbitrary. And word meanings are notorious shapeshifters because our word meanings change over time as we use our language creatively through things like metaphor. We also learned that different languages slice up the semantic space differently, and that semantics saves the day by giving us concrete terms and methodologies for describing the relationships between words within languages and between languages. Well, that's all for today. If you're a language nerd and you like quizzes, then check out the interactive digital quiz that we created for you, which we've linked for you in the description down below. It's got some really fun questions about semantics, so see what you know and let me know how you do. As always, if you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and leave us a comment in the comments down below. Oh, and if you want to understand how meaning making works in language, semantics is not the end of the story. You need to understand pragmatics too, which is all about how word meaning is context dependent. Think of it like this. Semantics is the literal meaning, while pragmatics is about contextual meaning. So stay tuned for that in our next video. Bye.